Well, we're back. If you are watching us before and you were hearing us and so forth, just realize that it was electronics and so forth who never depends on. So, welcome again to the Lessons of Vietnam show, where we try to tell the truth and get rid of the myths and so forth of the Vietnam War, the men and women who fought there. I'm your host, Bill Dixon. Vietnam 67, 68, 2004, 9, and 15. We're being broadcast from the studios of Nissan Communications. If you have a question or you need to get in touch with me be a guest or something, just give me an email at dixonbill80@yahoo.com. To be part of the show, dial 919-518-9773, or even better, go on to Skype and go to Computers 2K Voice, as you see there on the screen, and then take part of the show, ask questions, make comments. Let us know how you feel about our subject and so forth tonight. As you can see, we've got the Veterans Crisis Line up there. We are a veteran show done by veterans for veterans and veterans' families and people who are interested in learning more about the Vietnam War. There's 20 to 22 veterans a day committing suicide, and unfortunately, a lot of them are Vietnam veterans. So that's your numbers and so forth. If you know someone who's in crisis, let us give them this information. And going back to what we're talking about a while ago in the show, if you missed the show or any shows we do, you can always go back in and watch it on demand. You do the same thing as you did to watch it tonight live. The only difference is you go back and hit on demand and pick out the show you want. All right. Tonight's show is going to be Agent. And I did not put the word agents because it's listed kind of separately. It's Agent Blue, White, Purple, Pink, Green, Orange, and Orange 2. And how it was related to the Vietnam War. What were they? How were they used? And what was the end results? Okay. Agent Orange. Now, all through the show, I'm going to be using the word Agent Orange. Just so you know, Agent Orange is kind of the catch-all, bring it all together, because when they're talking about Agent Orange or any of the other the substances we'll be talking about tonight, rather than mention all of them, they just lump it all into the word Agent Orange, but they're different. You may have heard it, or you may not. I don't know where you'd have to be that you haven't heard about it, but perhaps you've even seen it issued on documentaries or in war movies. But what exactly is it? Agent Orange, Blue, White, Purple, Pink, Green, Agent Orange, and Agent Orange 2. They're defoliants, a herbicide used in the herbicidal, you know how am I with words here, warfare during the Vietnam War. During the war, an estimated 20 million gallons of toxic herbicide was sprayed on the jungles of Vietnam and the men and women who were in the jungles of Vietnam were exposed. Okay. The objective was to destroy the ecosystem in South Vietnam to disrupt the production of food while destroying plants that could have been used for hiding enemies. While that objective was met, an unbelievable amount of Vietnamese people and United States soldiers were exposed to chemicals that would change their lives forever, which is again part of what we're going to be talking about in the show tonight. During Vietnam, over 4.5 million Vietnamese people were exposed to the herbicide. Following this exposure, over 500,000 Vietnamese children were born with birth defects, and over 400,000 disabilities and deaths resulted. Now, we talked about here the American soldiers and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who also suffering from these herbicides. You know, we went off the war and we fought the war. We didn't realize we were going to bring the war home with us, and they were going to be killing our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. What are we talking about? What we're talking about are these chemicals that were defoliants. The definition of defoliants is a chemical spray or dust applied to plants in order to cause leaves to drop off prematurely. And you can see there in the picture of the two little boys and a little girl and the dog into an area that has been defoliated. And you can see the standing water, which will have the agents in it. It just kills the plants, and it's desolate. It's like a desert out there. Now, where did all this start from? During World War II, the military played a pivotal role in pioneering new chemicals that were both horrifically destructive and life-saving. Some of it was the same stuff. Chemical units spread a newly discovered insecticide, DDT. Now, you young people probably never heard of DDT because it's been banned. I think it's been still used in a couple places in the world, but it's not supposed to be. But at that time, we sprayed it all across Italy, Italian towns, and in soldiers' sleeping bags to control mosquitoes and ticks that carried malaria and typhus. Quite often, when soldiers are off at war, they die from the diseases of malaria, typhus, and other things than they do from the enemy and so forth. Back during the American Civil War, there were more men died from diseases than they were killed during the war. And to prevent that, they started using DDT to help with the ticks and lice and mosquitoes and so forth. In 1943, the military opened a chemical and biological weapons center at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And they did that to centralize the research. It was there that scientists in the crop division tested combinations of herbicides, including a precursor of Agent Orange made with a blend of herbicide 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. Now, I'm not going to ask you to remember what they are, because I'm not even going to bother to give you the chemical formula because it won't mean nothing anyway. Well, let's just say that it would do what it's supposed to be. Scientists in the 1930s had discovered that these chemicals mimic a plant's growth hormones, but they had been unsuccessful in harnessing its growth-inducing powers. Then in 1943, a botanist notified the Army that increased dosage turned the chemical into a plant killer, and the synthetic organic herbicide was born. So that's where the precursor of Agent Orange and so forth came on. Scientists at Fort Detrick tested the herbicides for possible use over the tropical vegetation covering Japanese-held islands in the Pacific. But the war ended before they could ramp up production, and luckily for them. Now, if you'll notice there, the barrel, how you could tell what the agent was in the barrel was that stripe. The barrels themselves were pretty much the same, but the Agent Orange in that barrel, because it had an orange stripe on it. The two herbicides in Agent Orange, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, were not secrets. Rather, they were two of the most popular widely available herbicides on the market. And you probably used some of it within this past summer to kill weeds and so forth around your house. There are widely available herbicides on the market. The government declassified its research on pesticides almost immediately in 1945, opened development for commercial markets. In 1945, a chemist at the American Chemical Plant Company near Philadelphia received a patent simply entitled herbicides. I cannot believe they gave him one just on, because that covers a broad spectrum of things, what exactly a herbicide was. Listing over a dozen preferred chemical formulas, including a 50-50 mix of 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D, similar to Agent Orange. In 1948, the Department of Agriculture registered these new herbicides and insecticides as economic poisons. And sales quickly took off. Because this crossover identity in the 1960s, their use as offensive weapons in Vietnam drew little public reaction. In other words, we've been using it for years. What difference does it make when we use it over there in Vietnam? The most common herbicide used was herbicide Orange, more commonly referred to as Agent Orange, a 50-50 mixture of the two herbicides, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. The other most common color-coded chemicals used was Agent White, which was very similar to Orange, and Agent Blue. Now, Agent Blue is an arsenic-based herbicide used to destroy broadleaf plants and trees. That's grass, rice, bamboo, bananas, and so forth. Now, that was the idea, to kill the rice plants and rice paddies so that the farmers couldn't give their rice, or the rice couldn't be taken away from the farmers by the VC or the North Vietnamese. Now, who come up with the idea of that, I'm not certain, because what were the farmers going to eat? The South Vietnamese farmers and so forth are going to eat. But nobody seems to worry about that, especially rice paddies during the Vietnam War. During the war, 1.25 million U.S. gallons of Agent Blue were used, successfully destroying 500,000 acres of crops. That's a lot of rice. Now, the group that was, how this got started out was Operation Ranch Hand. You know how the military likes to make anything an operation, give it a name. And their motto was, only you can prevent forest. In other words, they could go out and spray the vegetation and would kill the forest. So you have to, it's kind of like, it goes back off of Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. Well, only Operation Ranch Hand could prevent forest. The defoliation program started out small and nearly ended before it began, as the Department of Defense, the State Department, and the government of South Vietnam debated its efficiency. However, by November 1961, President Kennedy agreed with his advisors that the U.S. should participate in a selective and carefully controlled joint program of defoliant operations in Vietnam, starting with the clearance of key routes and proceed thereafter to food denial only, in the most careful basis of resettlement and alternative food supply has been created. Now, that was a mouthful, but it didn't mean nothing. It was agreed to use it on a controlled, limited service. But however, it was not used that way in the end. After Kennedy was killed and Johnson took over and Nixon, it was kind of, Katie barred the door, anything went. The first official Operation Ranch Hand mission took place on January 13th, 1962, along Highway 15 using C-123 as an aircraft. Now, I want you to think about something. We first started spraying defoliants January 13th, 1962. How many of y'all remember what got us into the war, supposedly, called the Gulf of Tonkin? Well, the Gulf of Tonkin was in August of 1964. So we were spraying these defoliants 2 years before we actually officially got in the war. Okay. Sounds like we're being incoming there. I don't know where that came from. My stomach was not growling, so whatever that was, we don't worry about it. We're going to just keep right on proceeding right along. The use of herbicides begun at the insistence of South Vietnamese President Diem. He pushed for it until President Kennedy gave the okay for testing Agent Blue against crops in Vietnam. Now let's just talk about how it was used. Codenamed Green, Agent Green, which was 2,4,5-T, they sprayed between 1962 and 1964 75,920 liters of Agent Green. Agent Pink, which was a formula of 2,4,5-T, and I'm not certain what else was added to it to make it different, because it looks like it's the same thing as green. 1962 to 1964, they sprayed 273,520 liters. Agent Purple, 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T, 1962 and 1964, they sprayed 2,594,800 liters of defoliants. Agent Blue, which has catecholic acid and sodium catecholic acid, between 1962 and 1971, they sprayed 6,100,640 liters of Agent Blue. That's a lot of acid out there, and arsenic. Orange 1 and Orange 2, which was made up of a combination of 2,4-D, 50%, and 2,4,5-T, 50%, they sprayed 43,332,640 liters of defoliants between 65 and 70. Now, sometime about 1970, Agent Orange was banned because they realized that it was causing problems. But if you look at it, Agent White, 2,4-D, and picoram, which is not that much difference from Agent Orange, during 65 to 71, they sprayed 21,798,400 liters of Agent White. All right. Okay. Where did you say it was coming from? Oh, that slide's making that noise. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. When it changes parts. Okay. Okay. All right. I did something on when I made this I didn't even know about. Operation Ranch Hand was responsible for the spraying of more than 95% of all herbicides used in Vietnam. Most spraying was done from modified C-123 aircraft. Defoliation occurred along waterways, roads, railroads, and other transportation routes to lower the risk of ambush. Extensive spraying was also conducted in the Mekong River area around the coastal mangrove swamps, also with the goal of reducing protective cover for the enemy. Operation Ranch Hand peaked in 1967 with 1.7 million acres of Vietnam and Laos were sprayed. How could we spray Laos? We never went in there. 85% for defoliation and 15% for crop destruction. Okay, there was an app for that, all right? Now, if you look there, this is what we call the Brown Water Navy. Those are the rivers of Vietnam, which were plentiful, especially down in Four Corps, down in the swampy areas that we were just talking about. As you can see, the vegetation grows right up to the banks. What they were finding was that the American Brown Water Navy guys were going up and down these narrow rivers and so forth and getting shot at really bad, because most of these ships are out of fiberglass, and fiberglass is not known for stopping bullets. So they found that there were concrete bunkers built behind that foliage you see there. So that was one of the reasons that it was started being used. Now, Admiral Elmo Bud Zumwalt Jr., he was the commander of Naval Forces Vietnam, and prior to his arrival, the Riverine Force has not been fully effective in combating the Viet Cong because they were just basically moving targets. Prior to his arrival, as I said, were not effective. Zumwalt combined all the compartmentalized forces in the Task Force 194 Operation Sea Lords. That's when he used the Brown Water Navy. He also had the Army involved, like the 9th Infantry, who had the who has also used Brown War Mobile Riverine Forces, what they were. He also ordered the use of chemical defoliants Agent Orange, which dropped the American casualty rate, but years later would have adverse effects on the people exposed to it. And a caveat there, I just want to let you know that Admiral Zumwalt's son, who was also a part of the Brown Water Navy, died as a result of the spraying of the Agent Orange defoliants. But he always said that he felt like he did the right thing because at the time he was told, just like the rest of us, oh, don't worry about it, it won't hurt you. And he did it, and he saved a lot of lives at the time. Don't know how it's balanced out over these years, but the man was doing what he thought he could do best for his sailors. Now, the primary mission of the Brown Water Navy was to prevent the movement of the supplies that were supporting the NLF, that was the National Liberation Front, along the rivers and coastal waters of South Vietnam. So many rivers and so forth in Vietnam that was like a major highway for getting arms and food and ammunition and other supplies that the communists needed. They were often hidden by civilians in sampans. Sampan is basically hollowed out a piece of wood, almost like a canoe. They were all over the water. The fishermen used them, and markets. They had whole areas of markets where you could buy vegetables and everything else from your boats and everything get on land. The job of the U.S. sailors was to stop these boats and check them out and so forth. Brown water boats patrolled inland waterways, deltas, and coastal areas day and night, and also enforced a night curfew on boat traffic. A second mission was combat. A coordinated combat unit with Army personnel, the Army Navy Riverine Assault Force, sought out and attacked enemy combatants on and along waterways and delta areas. In other words, they were the Brown Water Navy were the Uber drivers for the infantry guys. They would take them out, drop them off where they couldn't get to any other way because of the swamps down in the forecourt, down in the delta, where everything was wet all the time. So they would take the infantry out, drop them out, and then come back and pick them up and give them support. So now this is another example of areas that were sprayed with defoliants. As you can see, the mountain or the hill there, you can get an idea of what happened during the monsoon seasons. All that land washed off the hills there. And along with that, the land washing off also the residue of the chemicals that washed down into the rivers and the valleys below. And as you can see, Papasan there on a sandpan, on a small sandpan, going down one of the rivers that had been sprayed and so forth, defoliated. Now let's talk about a little bit about Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a soluble in diesel fuel and organic solvents, but not soluble in water. Agent White, in contrast, was soluble in water but not soluble in diesel fuel or other organic solvents. Agent Blue was a powder that was mixed with water before application. The formulation contained organic arsenic. That was Agent Blue, organic arsenic. All the tactical herbicides used in Vietnam were applied in concentrated form and not diluted. Let me read that to you again. They were not diluted. They were just like they come out of the barrel. Different tactical herbicides were used at different times during the war. By far, the most widely herbicide was Agent Orange, followed by Agent White, and other tactical herbicides that were top of use in Vietnam during the war was Agent Blue, as we've already talked about. Agent Purple, Pink, and Green. The names of these herbicides, as I showed you a while ago, were all derived from the color-coded bands around the 55-gallon drums used to ship and store them. So the tactical herbicides used in Vietnam were intended to kill a broad spectrum of plants. Agent Orange and Agent White were used against broadleaf plants and woody shrubs and trees, including mangroves. Agent Blue was effective against grasses and grains such as rice, and I guess that would also be elephant grass. Now you can see there in the picture how well protected the barrels are sitting out there from mortar attacks or whatever. That's Agent Blue as they're loading up Agent Blue in barrel on a truck there to be taken out and sprayed to wherever. And again, there's your Agent Orange, how you can tell the barrels with the blue stripe on the blue barrels there and the brown and orange stripes on the others. So now let's talk about what happened to that spraying. As you can see there in the picture there to the left with the helicopters coming in, the hill that was completely defoliated. We fought in it, we slept in it, all in those areas. If you see the picture of the guys wading through the water, well, you remember a while ago we had that picture of the hill where all that water and excess chemicals run off to, the streams like that. You waded in it, you wet all day carrying it, and we filled up our canteens with it. We used it, filled up our canteens, as I said. We used it for water and everything else. See, we were sprayed as we were out during the days like this. We were sprayed, and they always told us, don't worry about it. It'll not hurt you, okay? And some of us were dumb enough to go along with that. From 1961 to 1971, the U.S. government sprayed some 20 million gallons of herbicides and defoliants over vast areas of South Vietnam, and to a lesser extent in Laos, Cambodia, and even marginally into North Vietnam. In Operation Trail Dust, some 95% of the herbicides were sprayed by the U.S. Air Force flying C-123s as part of Operation Ranch Hand. Fitted with specially developed spray tanks with a capacity of 1,000 gallons of herbicide. The planes typically sprayed a 14-kilometer, that's 8.5 miles, swath of land in about 4.5 minutes. That's covering a lot of land. The remaining 5% was sprayed by backpacks, handheld pumps, helicopters, and trucks around U.S. military installations by the United States Army Chemical Corps and Allied forces. The herbicides sprayed were up to 50 times the concentrated that would have been used for normal agricultural use. Now, let me read that again, because I don't want you to miss this. The herbicides sprayed were up to 50 times the concentrated that would have been used for normal agricultural use. In other words, if you use Roundup, in Vietnam, they used 50 times that formula out there. I met a lieutenant in Vietnam who had sprayed it by hand through one of those pumps like you use in your yard. And before he even left Vietnam, he actually was coming down with symptoms and so forth. And it really, all the rest of his life, he really had a lot of problems with the ailments and so forth he had from Agent Orange. He spent about a 2.5 over there. Now, as you can see there from the helicopters, if you look at the one helicopter up close, you can see that barrel. Now, you think about it, you're spraying out that barrel there, and the helicopter's going down. I wonder what the wind is blowing, that helicopter, Agent Orange and so forth, how much of it got inside the cab of that guy sitting there. As you can see, the helicopter was spraying it. I was never sprayed by the Air Force on the 123s, but I was sprayed by the guys on the helicopters and so forth. As you can see them there, they're spraying by hand from an armored personnel carrier. We call them APCs. You can see there 123s flying over, usually 8 or more airplanes flying over together. So they cover a lot of area. As you can see some guys spraying by hand and so forth, and you can see the mist coming back on them and so forth. That helicopter blades is what it's doing, is helping the mist come back at them and so forth. Though you quite often end up really wet, soaked to the skin with what you were spraying and so forth. Now let's talk about the land-based applications. We just talked about how it was sprayed by helicopters, it was sprayed by hand, and other means like that. And also in the places like Long Binh, which was right next to Bien Hoa Air Base. Quite often when the planes came back and before they landed at Bien Hoa Air Base, they dumped what was left over in their tanks in the jungles and land around Long Binh. They also did that in other major bases like Da Nang and so forth, which is one of the problems they're still having today. But Operation Ranch Hand, C-123 aircraft had herbicide spraying apparatuses with nozzles that produced droplets with rapid selling velocity. A full tank sprayed a swath 80 meters wide and 14 kilometers long in 3.5 to 4 minutes. Virtually all droplets, even those smaller than 1/100 of a meter, were estimated to intercept the arc within 3 minutes, and 80% of the Agent Orange would hit vegetation within 1 minute. I mean, that stuff came down quick. And with 1 minute, and the remaining 13% of the herbicides would not contact vegetation, but would be blown around in the air. So if you were going through the air, you got to breathe it as well as have it dropped on you. Ranch Hand aircraft sprayed from 50 meters above the ground. Model aircrafts up to 8 were used for spray missions, although 7% of the missions involved 3 or fewer aircraft. You can see that when it went down, when they sprayed it, it saturated and they covered it well. If we could only do as well when we own crops today. Land-based applications via helicopter, trucks, and backpacks were conducted at lower speeds and lower altitudes for helicopters for base perimeter defoliation, roadside spraying, and some crop destruction. In other words, when you were putting a road in, as engineers, we were putting a road in, you sprayed it to take care of the vegetation. If you were putting up a fire base, what you wanted to do was go out and spray all the vegetation so that you had a clear land between you and the bad guys out there. So you sprayed it out by hand and so forth when the bulldozers couldn't get out there. The Army Chemical Corps was responsible for these applications, which accounted for about 3 to 4% of the herbicides used in Vietnam. The Buffalo turbine mounted on trucks could disperse herbicide at 280. I'm gonna jump that over and just say a minimum. and cover a swath 75 meters wide, and backpacks units that you had those tanks on your back and pumped them and sprayed them, 11 liters of herbicide at the time. So you really got up close and personal with it. Now let's talk about a couple other situations we had chemicals there. It wasn't just the herbicides that defoliants that we used. In addition to tactical herbicides, C-123 is operating over Vietnam sprayed other pesticides. One of the problems of tropical warfare is malaria. We got to take big orange malaria pills every day. In an effort to control the incidence of malaria in U.S. ground troops in Vietnam, the military initiated Operation Fly Swatter. That program, which began in 1967, used modified ranch hand C-123 aircraft, which were probably used the day before for spraying Agent Orange. They were known as bug birds to spray malathion. Now, you need to look up malathion. Malathion was stored at Bien Hoa, right next to Long Bien where I was, Air Base, Cam Ranh Bay, and Da Nang Air Base. Initially, the pesticides were sprayed over 9 major U.S. bases and adjacent sites every 11 to 14 days. Okay. Sometimes I think the mosquitoes over there liked it and use it for steroids and so forth. Now, there was another problem we had over there with the chemicals we were exposed to. Now, there are two things that all Vietnam vets can will agree to. Depending on what year you were there, as we've said before, where you were, what location, your job, all stories are different. But the two things we all agree on were the heat and humidity of Vietnam was one, and the smells of Vietnam, which were very unique, was the other. And there was a reason for the smells, not to mention the fact there were no flush toilets around, and vegetation and so forth was rotting from defoliants and so forth. But the other problem was U.S. personnel in Vietnam also had substantial opportunity to be exposed to diesel fuel. Diesel fuel was used not only for operating equipment and vehicles. JP-8 and JP-4, for instance, are types of diesel fuel used for aircraft such as jets and Huey helicopters. Some veterans may have concerns about potential harmful health effects from fuel exposures. Diesel fuel and JP-8 are the primary fuels used to operate vehicles in deployment settings. Since members may be exposed to fuels through skin, oral, or inhalation routes, possible health effects often depend on the way you were exposed, i.e., skin, oral, or breathing, the length of times of exposure, and personal characteristics, i.e., age, gender, genetic traits, diet, and other habits. Scientific research over long-term effects of diesel fuel is not conclusive, like everything else. Some research has shown there is a potential for health problems, for example, lung and heart effects. See, my father had leukemia, and what his job was as I was growing up, he delivered diesel fuel in trucks. He pumped it up, and quite often, sometimes the pipe would come out, and he'd be saturated with diesel fuel. If an individual is exposed to high amounts of fuel exposure for a long period of time, you can have problems with the lung and heart effects. The risk of developing long-term health effects often depends on many factors, including how long an individual was exposed, how much fuel they were exposed to, and whether or not they had symptoms at the time of exposure. So a lot of ifs. But how did you get exposed? Well, if you look at the top picture there, that is an umbrella. Now, people always ask me to explain to them what an umbrella is. As I tell them, it was a motorcycle with a cab. It carried 2 Americans or 14 Vietnamese, and everybody always laughs at me. Well, if you look at the picture, I counted them. There's 19 people on top of the umbrella. We don't know how many is inside the umbrella. You see the diesel trucks that ran up and down the highway. The helicopters were flying everywhere. The jets around the air bases and so forth. The armored personnel carriers, the MP there. The specialty. As I mentioned a while ago, there were no flush toilets. Every day, some special soldier, the cream of the crop, got to pull half cut into 55 gallons of human waste and burn it with diesel fuel. You put diesel fuel in there and you stirred it up and you kept it burning and so forth with diesel fuel. And I can tell you, it gave some interesting fumes. The tanks, as you can see a Vietnamese family on a motorcycle, the buses, Those were all, I mean, diesel fuel was used everywhere, and that added to the smells along with the gunpowder and so forth of Vietnam. So it was very interesting, the smells and so forth. Now, it has been estimated that over 74 million liters of tactical herbicides were used in Vietnam during 61 to 71, of which Agent Orange made up almost 60%, 43 million liters. The amount of Agent Orange sprayed varied by military region. Now, what I mean by region is you look there, up top there, where it says Republic of Vietnam, to the left of that, it says I Corps. That was, they were divided up as I Corps. Then you see the next one down as 2 Corps, then down in 3 Corps and 4 Corps. I Corps was right up above the word Republic of Vietnam. You see a dark black line there. That was a DMZ separating North Vietnam from South Vietnam. And I Corps was Da Nang and some of the other big names. Khe Sanh was there. 2 Corps was Pleiku, An Khe, Nha Trang, some of the cities there. Now, 3 Corps was where Long Binh, Bien Hoa Air Base, and Saigon were located. And then in 4 Corps, that's where the swamps and the Runsat zone was located and so forth. I Corps, south of the demilitarized zone, zone 8.52 million liters. In 2 Corps, they sprayed 9.54 million liters. In 3 Corps, they sprayed 20.1 million liters. Thank you very much. And then in I Corps, or 4 Corps, excuse me, in 4 Corps, in the Mekong, they sprayed 4.66 million liters. So that kind of give you an idea of where they sprayed it, how they sprayed it, and so forth, and the areas and so forth. Now, they didn't go with one manufacturer. They put out the formula they wanted, and several manufacturers made it, and they didn't always go by the formulas and so forth. The herbicide was purchased from several U.S. chemical manufacturers and transported via commercial merchant marine ships from the United States to military installations in Vietnam. That was something I didn't know. The merchant marines carried the ships. There was no Navy ship officially ever carried, supposedly, the barrels of the herbicides and so forth. The agents were used at full strength. That is, it was not diluted per recommendations of the chemical companies. So if it said five parts water to 1 part defoliant, it got straight just like it was. Blue Water Navy Vietnam vets report that none of the agents sprayed in Vietnam were diluted. They were used in very concentrated forms. The agents, again, were used up to 50 times their recommended concentrations. I've been told the dioxin in the formulas would not hurt people. But 50 times the formula, I would say if you ate 50 times gallons of ice cream a day rather than a gallon, after a while it would be detrimental to you. I don't care, even ice cream would be detrimental to you. In September 1971, the order came to gather all the remaining stocks of Agent Orange, including those under control of the armed forces of South Vietnam. In an operation codenamed Pacer Ivy, the remaining barrels of Agent Orange were rebarreled. Now, that sounds to me like they took it out of the barrels it was in for some reason and put it in new barrels, which means that they didn't spill any, and none of the people working with those barrels ever got any of them on them. I guess that's what they're trying to tell us. Anyway, rebarreled at Da Nang, Bien Hoa, and Tu Hoi air bases and shipped to Johnson's Islands in the South Pacific. Stocks of Agent Orange in the United States were shipped and stored in CB's base in Gulfport, Mississippi. Some 8.6 million liters of Agent Orange were destroyed by an incinerator ship in September of 1977 in Operation Pacer Ho. So what was the end results of all while spraying? As you can see again, the picture of the mountain there with defoliated, no forest to prevent runoff and washing away. Again, you can see the children out playing in the areas that have been defoliated. Now, some of these next pictures are pretty graphic. There was a whole lot more graphic, but I tried to not get too sensational. But these are some of the birth defects that have been a result in Vietnam from the kids or the parents of the kids, because these are relatively new pictures. the grandfathers and the fathers and the mothers, grandmothers, and so forth of the children of Vietnam who grew up drinking the water, eating the rice, and so forth. The children, as you can see, are writing with their feet, are born without arms, and so forth, all as a result of being sprayed with Agent Orange. The next picture, you see a man there whose arms are probably about the size of a baby. You can see the dwarfs ladies there. That young man was born with no eyes at all as a result of what we did with Agent Orange. But see, it came back to America with us. The men and women of America who went over and fought the war, they were also sprayed. They also brought the birth effects and so forth back home with them. These American soldiers exposed to Agent Orange or dioxin and Agent Blue arsenic during the Vietnam War often have children and grandchildren born with serious illnesses and disabilities. The United States government today is spending millions and millions and millions of dollars working with Vietnamese in Vietnam to try to clean up the areas that were high doses of the herbicides. And they have recognized the problems in Vietnam of the children, as you saw in those pictures. But as very little has been recognized and agreed to take the responsibility of what it's doing to the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the men and women who went to Vietnam to fight with good conscience. Second and third generations of Agent Orange are coming down with problems. This is what one Vietnam vet had to say. I was exposed to Agent Orange in 1969 and 1971. My grandson was born with missing the 6th chromosome. He has multiple issues, is now 8.4 years old, and 10 months ago, I applied for benefits and had to appeal and had my hearing on Halloween. I was told that VA does not acknowledge third-generation disabilities for fear that in addition to compensating us, Vietnam veterans, Vietnam would then demand compensation for all their third-generation disabled children. In other words, it's not that they say it's not causing a problem, it's an economic situation they don't want to open. Now, I put this down because I did go into the Vietnam Veterans of America website and took this information down, and I thought it was great information, but I didn't have time to ask them permission. I am a life member, so hopefully they'll let me get by with using it. I'm going to recommend that whether you're a Vietnam vet, a veteran at all, if you want to know more information about Agent Orange, what's going on and so forth, and what you're getting on this show tonight, they have a fantastic website. They have the faces of Agent Orange, stories of other veterans and their children and grandchildren and the children of Vietnam vets talking and so forth. Now, Agent Blue, Agent Orange, Agents Pink, Green, White, and Purple. The rainbow agents usually are listed under Agent Orange, as I mentioned before. Each agent causes varying degrees of harm to living creatures, from plants to birds to humans. Agent Orange and most of the rainbow agents were phenoxy herbicides contaminated with dioxin. Let's talk about primarily with Agent Blue. I think instead of everything being called Agent Orange, I think we ought to be using Agent Blue as the catch-all name. Agent Blue was the exception. Agent Blue was made of cacodic acid and sodium cacodic arsenic compounds. Arsenic, the favorite poison of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Agatha Christie and the Borgias. Everyone has heard of the lethality. Y'all understand I can't pronounce words, so you're just going to do it yourself. Of arsenic. Lethality of arsenic. You remember the story, Arsenic and Old Lace? I think Cary Grant was in that movie. But despite the warning of scientists and politicians, the United States military sprayed arsenic on rice paddies, bamboo groves, and Viet Cong, Vietnamese children, and its own personnel, us. Arsenic also is a carcinogen. There are two forms of arsenic. Organic arsenic is found in soil water, in soil, water, and food around the world. It is not harmful except at high doses. Inorganic arsenic also can be found in nature, but not in things we ingest. It's found with copper and lead in soils near these metals. It's also found in water, especially near oil deposits. Although organic arsenic is only dangerous in very highly concentrations or for some very long exposures, inorganic arsenic is highly poisonous. Under some circumstances, however, organic arsenic can transform into inorganic arsenic and wreak havoc. Many had argued that the organic arsenic could never become inorganic. Those were scientists. But that has been proven wrong. Until 2012, chickens in the United States were given compounds of arsenic to prevent certain diseases and to make the meat plump and pink. The chemical and chicken industries have insisted that arsenic was organic and therefore not poisonous. However, when livers of arsenic-treated chickens were compared to those not treated with arsenic, inorganic arsenic was found only in the former. Researchers conclude that organic arsenic had converted into lethal inorganic arsenic. So I don't think you'll find chicken anymore that's been fed these things. After the release of the 2011 peer evaluation, FDA studied 89 forms of 102 arsenic compounds. They were removed from the market because of the likelihood that can convert from organic to inorganic arsenic. But all that stuff was sprayed during the Vietnam War. There are many compounds of arsenic, many different names and labels. The bottom line is that arsenic is a heavy metal like lead, and all heavy metals are dangerous and carcinogenic. Attacking the food supply. While all the rainbow agents were used in defoliation, only Agent Blue targeted food crops. While the other agents destroyed broadleaf vegetables, Agent Blue was used on narrow-leaf plants. It was used to destroy bamboo cover, but its main purpose was to kill rice and other grains. The rice paddies couldn't be burned, and the phenoxy herbicides only worked on broadleaf plants. Agent Blue desiccated the rice plants. They wilted and crumbled. Agent Blue was the first used in 1962, spraying continued until 1971. Vietnamese rice today remains tainted with arsenic. I wonder where your rice comes from when you get a bag of rice. It's probably not from Vietnam, so I wouldn't even think about this, what you just heard there. By attacking the food supply, the reasoning was villages would be forced out and villages would no longer provide support and protection for the Viet Cong. If small villages no longer existed, anyone would be deprived of many bases. In other words, the Vietnamese communists could not go in and take the rice away from the farmers because there wasn't any rice. Of course, the farmers would not be able to be there because of no rice, so they'd have to leave and so forth. Didn't always work. If you know anything about the religion of the Vietnamese, they're very ancestral. Agent Blue then contributed to the flood of peasants into urban areas. An estimated 1.5 million uprooted people live in the slums of Saigon, many of the victims of a policy of herbicide use. In other words, they had to leave the farms and go back into the big cities and get by the best way they could in the slums and so forth. The villagers and Americans and Vietnamese military personnel weren't told of the dangers of herbicides. As a matter of fact, they were told the sprays were safe. I remember being told that, and we kind of sarcastically, when I was out in the 9th Infantry guys and got sprayed, I think they suspected at the time that it was being sprayed, but it was just like, well, what are they going to do, send me to Vietnam? So they took it because they were told it was safe. The affiliation and psychops of Vietnam. Herb Friedman wrote that C-47 planes were either just before or just after the spray planes that dropped leaflets explaining to the villagers that the herbicides were not dangerous and would keep everyone safe from the Viet Cong. Sometimes small planes would fly over the village with tape recorded messages to reassure the villagers that weren't in danger. That was nice of us, wasn't it? Okay. But as Fred Wilcox wrote in Scorched Earth, Legacy of Chemical Warfare in Vietnam, which is a book you may want to get, making their way through Vietnam's dense jungles, U.S. soldiers heard cacophony of squawking birds, chattering monkeys, and insects buzzing like high-voltage wires. And boy, it did sound like high-voltage wires. But after C-123 cargo planes swooped low over the trees, saturating them with Agent Orange, the ground was littered with decaying jungle birds, paralyzed and dying monkeys, clusters of dead fish shimmering like bottoms on the surface of slow-moving streams. Now, maybe that should have told us something at the time those were out. But we were told it wouldn't hurt you. I don't know why. I guess we felt like it wouldn't hurt the people, but it would hurt the animals. So I don't know exactly our thought patterns on that because it's been a while. Many military personnel were used hand sprayers. Agent Blue, in particular, was often sprayed by hand to kill bamboo. Helicopters and riverboats were also sprayed. No one, not the hand sprayers, the pilots of the villages, or the men of Navy boats wore protective gear. I never saw anybody wearing a protective gear spraying it. We were soaked in it. They were used for taking the barrels. As you can see, they cut them in two and made barbecue pits out of them. They held drinking water. They were used for to catch the human waste in outhouses. They were used for showers. They were washed out with and so forth. Arsenic can never be removed from the environment. We're running short of time, but I'm going to try to get through this last part. Early on in the war, scientists and scientific organizations warned against the herbicide program, but nobody seemed to pay a lot of attention. By 1970, the Department of Defense suspended the use of Agent Orange, but used Agent White instead. Why they used that instead, it's quite beyond me. Agent Blue, like other agents, were used at full strength. That is, was not diluted per recommendations of the chemical companies. Blue Water Navy Vietnam vets, and I think I've already read that slide, so I probably got it in here again. But we drank the water, ate the food, sprayed with Agent Orange. We slept on the ground, soaked with that shit, as he says. I got sprayed directly, soaking wet. The government is lying. They can make up all the story they want, but we know better. They weren't there. We were. The men and women in Vietnam who were near the contaminated areas drank it, ate it, and inhaled it, and wore it. Every study has concluded that arsenic is a carcinogenic. The cancers always listed include bladder, stomach, and lung, and often leukemia, inorganic arsenic can cause increased cancers of the skin, lymphatic cancers, and liver. Now, cancer assessment group, childhood cancers and birth defects have been linked to arsenic. Chemicals such as arsenic are able to cross the placenta to create cancers in the fetus. Now, this next one has really got me. The effects of arsenic often are not immediate. In fact, they can take decades to present. Arsenic can and does cause damage to DNA, which will last for generations. Let me read that again to you. Agent Blue and arsenic can change the veteran's DNA, which will affect his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and continue right on. It affects DNA. You think that how we prove right now we get people for crimes and so forth by checking their DNA? Well, Agent Orange changes that DNA. The men and women in the military in Vietnam were in the midst of the heaviest arsenic program in the world. This is some of the posters and so forth that have been put up since then. Vietnam 59 to 1975. I can do anything to you in the U.S. Army. We came home and death came home with us, Agent Orange. Agent Orange victim. In Vietnam, all gave some gave all, and our brothers are still giving. Sprayed and betrayed. We could fight what we could see, except that toxins above the trees. Agent Orange. Vietnam didn't kill me, but the Agent Orange sure is trying. Now, this is from the VA websites. I'm going to try to go over it because we were starting a little bit late as much as I can. But if we run out of time, I'm going to recommend that you go into the VA website. From the Agent Orange related illnesses. We believe that contact with Agent Orange, a toxic chemical used to clear trees and plants during the Vietnam War, likely causes several illnesses. This is from the VA. Find out if you can get disability compensation or benefits you've had contact with Agent Orange while serving in the military and how one or more of the illnesses listed below. What they are: cancers believed to be caused by contact with Agent Orange, chronic B-cell leukemia, Hodgkin's disease, multiple myelomas, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, prostate cancer, respiratory cancer, including lung cancer, soft tissue sarcomas. Other illnesses believed to be caused by Agent Orange: AL, a rare disease illness that happens when an abnormal protein called amyloid builds in your body. Colon acne, other types of acne form. Diabetes mellitus type 2, ischemic heart disease, Parkinson's disease, peripheral neurology, early onset, porphyria cutanea tarda. You can go back and look these up and get the information. I want you to realize something out there. If you feel like you may have some of the diseases, you're not alone. There are veteran service officers through the Vietnam Veterans of America, the DAV, and some of the other veterans supporters, the American Legion, the VFW. They're out there willing to help you to get your whatever that needs to get you treated and so forth. If you have an illness, you think it's caused by Agent Orange contact, you don't see it even listed here, apply for it anyway. Just document it with the veteran service officer, have your doctor come in and say they think that what you have is associated with Agent Orange, because that list that you got there was not a answer to everything. There's a lot of other things that are in the works out there. If enough people have these problems, then they will be recognized. A list of Agent Orange decisions awaited VA in 2017. They were going to come back in and name some more diseases that were associated with Agent Orange. The department, this is what they had to say. The Department of Veterans Affairs was to decide whether to add new diseases to its list of conditions presumed to be linked to Agent Orange. It also faced calls to compensate naval veterans and those who served along the Korean military zone. For immediate release, this is a press release, came out November 1st, 2017, from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Today, U.S. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Dr. David J. Shulkin, announced that he is considering possible new presumptive conditions that may qualify for disability compensation related to Agent Orange exposure. What he's saying there, that they didn't make that decision, they're making a decision to make a decision later. Although after thoroughly reviewing the National Academy of Medicine's latest report regarding veterans and Agent Orange and associated data and recommendations from the NAM Task Force, I have made a decision to further explore new presumptive conditions for service connections that may ultimately qualify for disability compensation. Secretary Shulkin said, I appreciate NAM's work and the commitment and expertise of VA's NAM Task Force and look forward to working with the administration on the next steps in the process. The Department of Veterans Affairs will now begin to work with the administration to concurrently conduct a legal and regulatory review of those potential presumptive conditions for awarding disability compensations to eligible veterans. That is what you call procrastination. Put it off till a few more die, and how you want to look at it. Okay, that was my little personal editorial there. Now, this is the Blue Water Navy guys have been trying for years to be included in the presumptive diseases from Agent Orange. Some of them were off in the blue water, off the coast of Vietnam, but very close. And this is the decision from Washington, November 2nd, 2017. Chairman Phil Rowe, MD, Republican from Tennessee, released the following statement after the House Committee on Veterans Affairs passed 8 bills out of committee. I'm disappointed we weren't able to reach an agreement to extend the resumption of exposure for Agent Orange to include Blue Water Navy veterans. 6 months ago, when this bill was considered at a legislative hearing, I asked for the offset ideas from my colleagues who have concerns about using the round down or on cost of living adjustments. This offset would amount to less than $1 per month in a COLA adjustment for some veterans while extending critical benefits for others. See, basically what they decided here was that they're not going to give any compensation or really to recognize the problems that the Blue Water Natives has because they can't afford it. Now, what they were talking about doing is the COLAs. People who career military, who receive a COLA or pension each month, they were trying to cut the COLAs by a little bit, maybe $1, to have some more money to help take care of that, but Congress decided not to do anything. I have spoken to many veterans who said they would be willing to give up less than $1 a month to do it right by Blue Water Navy veterans, and I imagine many veterans around the country would feel the same. Again, it comes back to who's going to pay for it, how they're going to pay for it. Now, if you are out there and you're a Vietnam veteran, I recommend highly that you sign up for the Agent Orange registry. It's not the same thing as having disease, but if you were in Vietnam, sign up for the registry. VA's Agent Orange Registry health exam alerts veterans to possible long-term health problems that may be related to Agent Orange exposure during the military service. The registry data helps VA understand and respond to those health problems more effectively. Contact your local VA environmental health coordinator about getting an Agent Orange Registry health exam. If you're in the Raleigh-Durham area, you go to the Durham VA, all you got to do is tell them that you want to be on the registry, and they will work with you. They're very good over there about that. The Agent Orange Registry health exam. This comprehensive health exam includes an exposure history, medical history, physical exam, and any test if needed. A VA health professional will discuss the results face-to-face with the veteran in a follow-up letter. In other words, you can go to VA and get all the tests and so forth. Important points to remember about registry health exams. Free to eligible veterans and with a no copay. Even if you got a copay in the VA, you got a free exam there. Non-disability compensation exam. This is not putting in for disability in any way. This just gets you on the registry so that if you do have to go in for a compensation, that you're already on the register. Enrollment in VA's health care system is not necessary. If you've never signed up for the VA health care system, you can still get the Agent Orange registry, get in on the registry. Based on veterans' recollection of service, not on their military records. In other words, your military record is going to have to show that you were there. It will not confirm exposure to Agent Orange. Just get in the registry to see if you are having problems. Veterans can receive additional registry exams if new problems develop. In other words, if you get farther down the road and you think you have a problem, then you can go back in for another exam. Veterans' family members are not eligible for Agent Orange Registry health exam. That's very important to remember there. Eligibility for Agent Orange Registry health exam. These veterans are eligible for the Agent Orange Registry health exam. Vietnam. Veterans who served in Vietnam between 1962 and 1975, regardless of length of time. You're only there for a day or two. Veterans who served aboard smaller river patrol and swift boats that operated in inland waterways of Vietnam, also known as brown water veterans. Check the VA's list of U.S. Navy and Coast Guard ships that operated in Vietnam. If you're in Korea, veterans who were in Korea demilitarized zone between April 1st, 1968 and August 31st, 1971. Thailand, you can see U.S. Air Force veterans who were at Royal Thai Air Force Base and the different locations there. You are also eligible to go in. Other Agent Orange exposure. Veterans who may have been exposed to herbicides during a military operation or as a result of testing, transporting, or spraying herbicides for military purposes. Learn about herbicide tests and storage outside Vietnam. If you go to the website, you can look this up. Interested in disability compensation? The registry evaluation is separate from VA's disability compensation process. Does not confirm exposure during service. Veterans who want to be considered for disability compensation for health problems related to Agent Orange or expected Agent Orange exposure must file a claim for that benefit. Okay. During the claims process, VA will check military records to confirm exposure to Agent Orange or qualified military service. If necessary, VA will set up a separate exam for compensation. So just need to go talk to them. Again, from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the only thing currently recognized for children of Vietnam vets. Now, this is firstborn. This is not your grandchildren or great-grandchildren. These are your children. And the only thing recognized is children with spina bifida. That is the only one currently that's been recognized by the VA. If you have a child that you think may have had spina bifida, even if they're grown now and you think they had a problem, be sure to call the right people and get it checked out and so forth. Some of the things with vocational training and so forth, eligible for benefits. They will be eligible for benefits. There's a form there, VA Form 210304. If you talk to a good, credible veteran service officer, they will be able to give you that form or help you get that form. Vietnam and Korean veterans' children with spina bifida, children who have spina bifida occulta, and I don't know what the difference are, and are biological children of veterans who served in Vietnam or in a demilitarized zone in Korea during the Vietnam era may be eligible if the birth father or mother served. So even if your mother or father, either one served, and you have a problem with spina bifida, you should talk and so forth. Women veterans, children with birth defects, children who have certain birth defects and are biological children of women veterans who served in Vietnam may be eligible if the birth mother served in Vietnam during the period beginning February 28, 1961 and ending on May 7, 1975. The affected child must have been conceived after the veteran first entered Vietnam during the qualifying service period. And I apply for benefits on that form 21034 and questions. You can dial toll-free at 1-888-820-1756 or 1-800-829-4833. And if you have any questions whatsoever out there, go to the Vietnam Veterans website. They have a great website. They do they do town hall meetings. If you kind of keep up with the news, there might be a town hall meeting going on in your neighborhood that you can attend. But there's help out there, folks. If you know a veteran or a veteran's family or the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren of a veteran who's having health issues that may be related, right now there is no compensation or benefits for being recognized as being a children or grandchildren, but it may help sometime in the treatment. And also someday, if they decide how they're going to pay for it, they may recognize those problems. Be sure to tune in. Our next show will be January 10th. I'm working with 3 different veterans as far as being our guest. So I hope to line those up for the next 3 shows. Again, I will see you next year and have a great and wonderful beginning of the new year. Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.